Dragon hatchlings kept escaping the royal nursery, always found sleeping in the human janitor's lap. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The royal corridors of Castle Drakeheart echoed with the sounds of panic. 6 dragon hatchlings had vanished from the nursery again, and Queen Nyleria was not pleased. Through the gleaming halls of the castle, a lone human janitor named Ethan Cole quietly swept the marble floors, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding in the royal chambers above. The kingdom of Vastoria was unlike any other in the known realms. For millennia, the royal family had maintained their power through an ancient pact with dragons. The royal bloodline didn't just command dragons, they shared their magic, raised their young, and protected their eggs when the adult dragons embarked on necessary migrations. This symbiotic relationship had made Vastoria prosperous and untouchable. Until recently. This is the 4th time this week. Queen Nyleria's voice boomed through the royal chambers. Her emerald scales glistened as she paced, tail swishing in agitation. Though she appeared human from a distance, her draconic heritage was evident in the fine scales that adorned her skin, the vertical pupils of her eyes, and the small horns that curved elegantly from her temples. Royal Dragon Master Thorn bowed deeply, his ceremonial robes pooling around him. Your Majesty, we've doubled the guards, strengthened the nursery wards, and even installed new enchanted gates. We simply cannot explain how they keep escaping. The Queen's clawed fingers tapped impatiently on the arm of her throne. The 6 missing hatchlings weren't just any dragons. They were from the clutch of the great Crimson Doubler Mazarath, the most powerful dragon ally of Vastoria. Their safety was paramount not only for the kingdom's security, but for the continued alliance that had protected the realm for generations. Find them, she hissed, before Azarath returns. I needn't remind you what happened to the last kingdom that failed in its duty to protect Dragon Young. The entire court shuddered. The Ashen Wastes to the south had once been the prosperous kingdom of Alaria, until they had lost a clutch of dragon eggs during a similar arrangement. Nothing remained now but a scorched crater visible from the highest towers of Castle Drakeheart. As the royal guards dispersed to continue the search, Captain Lysander, head of the Queen's Guard, stroked his silver-streaked beard thoughtfully. Perhaps we're overlooking something. The hatchlings always disappear at roughly the same time each day, and they always return to the nursery before nightfall. They're clearly not being stolen. They're leaving of their own accord. The Queen frowned. Dragons are creatures of habit and comfort. If they're leaving the nursery repeatedly, something is drawing them elsewhere. Something they find more appealing than the accommodations we've provided. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Find whatever, or whoever, is luring them away, Captain. And when you do, bring them to me. Captain Lysander nodded grimly and departed, leaving the Queen to her troubled thoughts. Several floors below, Ethan Cole whistled softly as he pushed his mop across the lower eastern corridor. At 34, he had the weathered face of someone who had seen his share of hardships. His brown hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and laugh lines crinkled around his eyes. As the only human employed in the largely draconic castle, he kept to himself, working diligently and staying out of the way of the more important staff. Ethan had arrived in Vastoria 6 months ago, a refugee from one of the human kingdoms beyond the Misty Range. The border guards had found him half-dead from exposure and brought him to the capital. Rather than turn him away, the Queen had surprisingly offered him a position as a castle janitor, a menial role, but one that provided room, board, and safety. It was more than he had expected, especially given the traditionally strained relations between dragons and humans. Pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, Ethan glanced up at the ornate clock on the wall. Almost midday. His favorite time of day. Abandoning his mop and bucket in a small utility closet, he made his way to a secluded courtyard on the eastern side of the castle, one rarely used by the staff or royalty. It was his special place, where he took his lunch each day, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the distant view of the mountains that reminded him of home. As he settled onto his usual bench and unwrapped his simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, he didn't notice the small shadows flitting across the courtyard stones, nor the tiny eyes watching him from behind a nearby fountain. There you are, he said warmly as the first tiny head poked out from behind the fountain. The small dragon, no larger than a house cat, chirped excitedly and scampered toward him, its crimson scales glittering in the sunlight. 5 more hatchlings followed, each identical to the first, with brilliant ruby scales and tiny golden horns just beginning to bud. "I was wondering if you'd visit today," Ethan said, breaking off small pieces of cheese and offering them to the eager hatchlings. "Hungry as always, I see." The dragons chirped and purred as they clambered onto the bench beside him, some climbing onto his lap, while others perched on his shoulders. Their tiny claws didn't scratch him. They were remarkably careful, as if they understood their own strength even at this young age. This had become their daily ritual over the past 2 weeks. Ethan had first encountered the hatchlings when one had wandered into this courtyard while he was eating. Instead of fleeing or calling for help, he'd offered it a bit of his lunch. The next day, the same hatchling had returned with a sibling. By the end of the week, all 6 visited him daily. "You know, your caretakers are probably worried sick," he murmured as he stroked the head of the hatchling curled in his lap. The tiny dragon purred, a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. "I really should tell someone about our little meetings." But he never did. These moments were precious to him, a bright spot in his otherwise lonely existence. The dragons seemed to sense this, often nuzzling him affectionately or bringing him small gifts, a pretty pebble, a colorful leaf, or once, amusingly, a silver spoon clearly pilfered from the royal kitchens. As the warm midday sun bathed the courtyard, the hatchlings, full from their snacks, began to drowse. One by one, they curled up in Ethan's lap or against his side, their rhythmic breathing becoming slow and deep. Ethan leaned back against the bench, careful not to disturb them. He learned that dragon hatchlings, like human babies, needed regular naps. Within minutes, all 6 were sound asleep, piled on and around him like a litter of exotic, scaly kittens. "Sweet dreams, little ones," he whispered, feeling his own eyelids growing heavy in the pleasant warmth. He never intended to fall asleep during these visits, but the peaceful atmosphere and the comforting weight of the hatchlings often lulled him into a brief nap. Today was no exception. As Ethan drifted off, he didn't notice the shadow that fell across the courtyard, nor did he hear the sharp intake of breath as Captain Lysander, having followed the sound of unfamiliar chirping, discovered the missing royal hatchlings curled up contentedly in the lap of a simple human janitor. The captain stood frozen, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Dragons, especially young ones, were notoriously selective about who they allowed to touch them. Even the royal handlers, descendants of ancient draconic bloodlines, approached the hatchlings with reverence and caution. Yet here was a human, an outsider, with all 6 of Azuratha's offspring sleeping peacefully around him, completely at ease. It was unprecedented. It was suspicious. And to the captain, it was dangerous. Silently, he backed away from the courtyard entrance. The queen needed to see this with her own eyes. Ethan awoke to the gentle nudging of tiny snouts against his chin. The hatchlings were stirring, chirping softly as they stretched their small wings and yawned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. He smiled, checking the time on the courtyard clock. Their nap had lasted about an hour, the usual duration. "Time for you to head back, I suppose," he said, gently lifting the hatchling from his lap and setting it on the ground. "Don't want anyone to worry about you." As if understanding, the hatchlings chirped in unison, nuzzling against his hands one final time before scampering toward the courtyard exit. They always seemed to know their way back to the nursery without guidance, another sign of their remarkable intelligence even at such a young age. Ethan watched them go with a mixture of fondness and melancholy. Then he gathered the remains of his lunch, stretched to work out the stiffness in his back, and returned to his abandoned mop and bucket. The afternoon's work awaited, and he had fallen behind schedule due to his impromptu nap. He had just resumed mopping the eastern corridor when a contingent of royal guards appeared at the far end, marching purposefully in his direction. At their center walked Queen Nyleria herself, her regal bearing and draconic features unmistakable even at a distance. Behind her strode Captain Lysander, his expression grim. Ethan's heart sank. Somehow they knew. He set aside his mop and knelt, head bowed, as protocol demanded when in the presence of royalty. "Rise, human," the queen commanded as she approached, her voice cool and measured. Ethan stood slowly, keeping his eyes downcast. "Your Majesty, how may I serve you?" "You can start by explaining why the royal dragon hatchlings, the offspring of Azurath the Crimson, have been found seeking your company instead of remaining in their nursery." There was no point in denial. "I meant no harm, Your Majesty. They found me while I was taking my midday meal. I shared my food with them, and they seemed to like my company." "Indeed." The queen's vertical pupils narrowed. "And you didn't think to report this to the Dragon Master? You didn't consider that these are not common pets, but royal dragons, crucial to the safety and prosperity of this kingdom?" Ethan swallowed hard. I should have reported it immediately. I have no excuse, Your Majesty." "No, you don't." The queen circled him slowly, her clawed fingers tapping against her arm. "Captain Lysander believes you may be using some form of magic or charm to lure them away. Are you a sorcerer, hiding among my staff?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "No, Your Majesty. I have no magical abilities whatsoever. I'm just a janitor." "Then explain why creatures of ancient magic, hatchlings who barely tolerate the touch of their royal handlers, choose to sleep in your lap." "I cannot, Your Majesty. They simply appeared one day and I was kind to them. That's all." The queen studied him for a long moment, her ancient eyes seemingly peering into his soul. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, a slight upward curve of her lips that did nothing to soften her predatory appearance. "Show me," she said. "Your Majesty, show me how you interact with them. The hatchlings have returned to their nursery. You will accompany me there now." Escorted by the queen and her guards, Ethan was led through parts of the castle he had never seen before. They ascended to the upper towers, passing through corridors adorned with ancient tapestries depicting dragons and humans in various scenes of alliance and warfare. Finally, they arrived at an ornate door inscribed with draconic runes that glowed faintly blue. The Dragon Master Thorn awaited them, his eyes widening in shock when he saw Ethan among the royal entourage. "Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to allow this human into the sacred nursery?" "I do," the queen replied firmly. "Open the doors, Dragon Master." With clear reluctance, Thorn pressed his palm against the center rune. The door shimmered and then swung inward, revealing a circular chamber with a high domed ceiling. The room was warm, almost hot, and filled with nests of various sizes. In the center nest, lined with glittering gems and soft fabrics, the 6 crimson hatchlings dozed fitfully. "Approach them," the queen instructed Ethan. Under the watchful eyes of the queen, the Dragon Master, and Captain Lysander, Ethan stepped cautiously toward the central nest. The hatchlings, sensing his presence, immediately perked up. 6 pairs of golden eyes fixed on him, and a chorus of excited chirps filled the chamber. Before anyone could react, all 6 hatchlings launched themselves from their nest, scampering across the floor and climbing Ethan's legs to reach his arms and shoulders. Their joy was palpable, tiny wings fluttering and tails whipping back and forth in obvious excitement. "Remarkable," the queen whispered. Dragon Master Thorn looked as though he might faint. "This is impossible. Even I cannot handle them so freely. They've bitten 3 of our most experienced handlers this week alone." Ethan stood awkwardly, now covered in affectionate dragon hatchlings. One perched on his head, grooming his hair with careful attention. "They're really very sweet," he offered lamely. "Sweet?" Thorn sputtered. "They are the offspring of Azurath, the most fearsome dragon in the Eastern Territories. They are born predators, descended from the ancient WYRMS who could level mountains with a thought. They are not sweet." The queen raised a hand, silencing the Dragon Master. "And yet, they clearly disagree." She approached Ethan slowly, observing as the hatchlings watched her but made no move to retreat from their perches on the human. "They trust you completely. I'm just kind to them, Your Majesty. I listen to them. I think they might be lonely." "Lonely?" Thorn scoffed. "They have the finest care in the kingdom, the most skilled handlers, the most comfortable nests, the most nutritious food. But do they have affection?" Ethan asked quietly, gently stroking the head of the hatchling that had settled in the crook of his arm. "Do they have companionship? Someone to simply sit with them, to make them feel safe? They're only babies, after all." The room fell silent except for the contented purring of the hatchlings. The queen's expression was unreadable as she considered the scene before her. "Leave us," she finally commanded. "Everyone except the human." Captain Lysander hesitated. "Your Majesty, I must advise against. I am in no danger from either this man or these hatchlings," the queen interrupted. "Leave us." Reluctantly, the captain and the Dragon Master withdrew, closing the nursery door behind them. Alone with the queen, Ethan shifted nervously, careful not to disturb the hatchlings now settling comfortably against him. Queen Nyleria moved to a cushioned bench near one wall and sat, gesturing for Ethan to do the same on a nearby seat. As he carefully lowered himself, mindful of his small passengers, she spoke. "I have ruled Vastoria for 3 centuries, human. In that time, I have seen countless interactions between dragons and other species. Never have I witnessed anything like this. I can't explain it, Your Majesty." "Perhaps I can." The queen leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, why did you flee your homeland? The truth, if you please." Ethan tensed, and the hatchlings, sensing his discomfort, chirped questioningly. He stroked them reassuringly before answering. "My village was destroyed in the border wars with Keldoria. I lost everyone. My wife, my daughter, our home. I had nowhere to go, so I traveled east, hoping to find peace somewhere beyond the mountains." "And before the war? What was your occupation?" "I was a teacher, Your Majesty. I taught young children in our village school." The queen's eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. "A teacher, a caretaker of the young. And before that?" Ethan hesitated. "How did you?" "Answer the question." "I was a soldier. For 12 years, I served in the king's army, until I met my wife and decided I wanted a different life. A peaceful life. A soldier who became a teacher, who now serves as a janitor." The queen nodded slowly. "A man who has known violence, but chosen peace. Who has experienced loss, but retains kindness. Do you know what dragons value above all else, Ethan Cole?" He shook his head. "Authenticity. Truth of being. Dragons can sense deception, artifice, hidden motives. Even hatchlings possess this ability, though they cannot yet understand what they sense." She gestured to the contented young dragons draped across his lap and shoulders. "They feel your genuine nature, your lack of fear or greed. They sense in you something rare, a human who wants nothing from them except to give them comfort." One of the hatchlings chirped loudly, as if in agreement, causing the queen's lips to curve in a slight smile. "Your arrival in Vastoria was no accident," she continued. "The border guards who found you reported a most unusual circumstance. 6 wild dragons circling overhead, guiding them to your location. I offered you employment not out of charity, but curiosity. I wanted to discover why dragons would protect a human stranger." Ethan's mind reeled with this revelation. "I don't understand. Why would wild dragons help me?" The queen rose and approached a large crystal embedded in the wall. When she touched it, it illuminated, projecting an image into the air, a detailed map of the known realms. The dragon territories extend far beyond Vastoria's borders. Their communication networks are vast and ancient. Word travels among them in ways we cannot comprehend. She turned back to him, her expression serious. "I believe you encountered dragons before, perhaps during your military service or your travels. Perhaps you showed kindness to one without realizing its importance. Dragons do not forget such things." Ethan frowned, searching his memory. "There was, during the war, before my unit was disbanded. We found an injured creature in a cave. My commanding officer wanted to kill it. He thought it might be a Keldorian war beast. But it was just a wounded animal, scared and in pain. I convinced him to leave it alone. We moved on. I never got a clear look at it in the darkness, but perhaps it got a clear look at you," the queen finished for him. "And perhaps it remembered." The implications were staggering. Had he unknowingly helped a dragon? Had that single act of mercy somehow led him here, to this castle, to these hatchlings? "What happens now?" he asked quietly. The queen considered him for a long moment. "Now, Ethan Cole, I offer you a choice. You may continue your work as a janitor, visiting the hatchlings during sanctioned periods under the supervision of the Dragon Master. Or," she paused, and Ethan had the distinct impression she was making a momentous decision, "or you may accept a new position as assistant dragon keeper, with primary responsibility for the care and early education of these particular hatchlings. The role comes with appropriate quarters, compensation, and status within the castle hierarchy. Ethan stared at her in shock. But I'm not. I don't have any training with dragons. I'm not of draconic bloodline like your other handlers. Evidently, that matters less than we have always believed. The queen gestured to the contented hatchlings. They have chosen you, and dragons rarely choose poorly. What about the Dragon Master? He seemed displeased. Thorn will adapt, or he will find his services no longer required, the queen said with a dismissive wave of her clawed hand. The safety and happiness of these hatchlings is my primary concern. Azurath will return within the month to check on his offspring. I would prefer to show him contented younglings rather than explain why they keep escaping their nursery. One of the hatchlings, the smallest of the clutch, had fallen asleep in Ethan's lap, its tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. He looked down at it, feeling an unexpected swell of protectiveness. I accept, Your Majesty. I would be honored to care for them. Excellent. The queen moved toward the door, but paused before opening it. One more thing, Ethan Cole. These are not ordinary dragons, even by the standards of their kind. Azurath's lineage is ancient and powerful. These hatchlings will grow to be among the most formidable dragons in the realm. The bond you form with them now will shape not only their development, but potentially the future of relations between our species. The weight of this responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders, heavier than the physical weight of the dozing hatchlings. I understand, Your Majesty. I won't let them down. Or you. See that you don't. With that, she departed, leaving Ethan alone with his new charges. He looked around the nursery, now his workplace, and then down at the trusting young creatures that had, through some miracle or cosmic coincidence, chosen him as their caretaker. For the first time since losing his family, Ethan felt a sense of purpose, of belonging. Well, little ones, he whispered, gently stroking the head of the sleeping hatchling. It seems we're going to be spending a lot more time together. In response, the tiny dragon purred in its sleep, a sound of such perfect contentment that Ethan couldn't help but smile. News of Ethan's unprecedented appointment spread through Castle Drakeheart like wildfire. By evening, there wasn't a servant, guard, or courtier who hadn't heard about the human janitor who had somehow charmed Azurath's hatchlings and earned the queen's favor. Reactions were mixed. Some whispered that it was a sign of the queen's failing judgment. Others suggested darker theories, that the human had used forbidden magic or that he was a spy from one of the human kingdoms. A few, particularly those who had worked alongside Ethan and knew his quiet, diligent nature, were simply happy that the kindly janitor had found a better position. For Dragon Master Thorn, the appointment was nothing short of an insult. He had dedicated his life to the study and care of dragons, tracing his lineage back 15 generations to the first draconic human unions. The idea that an untrained human refugee could connect with royal hatchlings in ways he couldn't was not just confounding. It was humiliating. This is a mistake, Thorn insisted as he paced the queen's private study later that evening. The human has no training, no understanding of draconic physiology or psychology. He doesn't even speak the old tongue. Queen Nyleria, seated at her desk reviewing ancient scrolls, didn't bother looking up. The hatchlings don't speak the old tongue either, Dragon Master. They are infants. But as they grow, he will learn alongside them. She finally raised her eyes to meet his. Your position as Royal Dragon Master is not in jeopardy, Thorn. You remain our foremost expert on adult dragons and their complex needs. But we must acknowledge that something extraordinary is happening with these hatchlings and this human. To ignore it would be foolish. Thorn's jaw tightened. And when Azurath returns, what will the great Crimson think of his offspring being raised by a human? That, the queen said with a slight smile, remains to be seen. But I suspect Azurath may know more about this situation than we do. While the castle buzzed with gossip, Ethan spent his first evening as assistant dragon keeper getting properly acquainted with the nursery and its systems. The chamber was equipped with sophisticated temperature controls, specialized feeding stations, and enchanted toys designed to stimulate young draconic minds. Most impressive was the large crystal basin in the center, filled with a shimmering liquid that seemed to shift between all the colors of the rainbow. "It's a scrying pool," explained Mira, a young draconic woman assigned to assist Ethan in his transition. Unlike the queen, Myra's draconic features were subtle, just a faint pattern of scales along her hairline and the backs of her hands. "It allows us to monitor the health of the hatchlings. Each color represents a different aspect of their well-being." Ethan peered into the swirling colors. "And what does this tell you?" Mira smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It tells me they're happier and more content than they've been since arriving here. Look at the predominance of gold and pink. Those indicate joy and security." The hatchlings themselves had finally settled into their central nest for the night, piled together in a heap of crimson scales and gently twitching tails. They had been reluctant to leave Ethan, following him around the nursery as he explored, but eventually succumbed to exhaustion. "They'll sleep through the night now," Mira assured him. "Young dragons need more rest than adults, about 16 hours a day. They're most active in the morning and late afternoon. That explains why they always found me during my lunch break," Ethan mused. "It was their afternoon active period." Mira nodded. "Precisely. And speaking of rest, you should get some too. Your new quarters are ready, just down the hall from the nursery. Much nicer than the servants' wing, I imagine." Indeed, the chambers assigned to Ethan were palatial compared to his former lodgings. A spacious sitting room with comfortable furniture, a separate bedroom with a four-poster bed, a private bathroom with an actual bathtub, luxuries he hadn't enjoyed since before the war. There was even a small balcony overlooking the eastern mountains, the direction from which Azurath would eventually return. As Ethan prepared for bed that night, his mind whirled with the day's events. How had his life changed so dramatically in a matter of hours? Yesterday, he had been an anonymous janitor, invisible to the castle's elite. Today, he was the caretaker of the kingdom's most precious assets, with quarters befitting a minor noble. Yet for all the material improvements in his circumstances, what moved him most was the memory of those tiny dragons curled trustingly in his lap. They needed him. After years of loss and aimless wandering, Ethan was needed again. He fell asleep more peacefully than he had in years. The next few weeks established a new rhythm to Ethan's life. His days began at dawn with the hatchlings' first feeding, a complex mixture of specially prepared meats, minerals, and a viscous blue liquid Mira called Drake's milk, though it came from no mammal Ethan had ever heard of. The hatchlings greeted each morning with boundless enthusiasm, racing around the nursery, climbing the specially designed rock walls, and playfully nipping at each other's tails. They reserved special excitement for Ethan, often using him as a climbing frame or perching on his shoulders while he prepared their meals. Dragon Master Thorn insisted on personally overseeing Ethan's training, though his instruction often came with thinly veiled condescension. "Dragons are not pets," he lectured during their third session. "They are ancient, intelligent beings who form alliances with lesser species when it suits their purposes. Never forget that even these hatchlings will grow to be creatures of immense power and pride." Ethan nodded respectfully, even as one of the hatchlings, the one he had privately named Ruby for her particularly vibrant scales, playfully tugged at his shoelaces. "I understand, Dragon Master. I don't think of them as pets." "Then what do you think of them as?" Thorn challenged. Ethan considered the question seriously. "Students, perhaps. Children in need of guidance. Partners in a journey we're just beginning." This answer seemed to surprise Thorn, whose expression flickered between dismissal and reluctant approval. "An interesting perspective. We shall see if you maintain it when they reach their first growth spurt and begin breathing fire." Despite the Dragon Master's warnings, Ethan found daily joy in caring for the hatchlings. He established routines for them, feeding times, play periods, rest hours, and, most importantly, education sessions. Drawing on his experience as a teacher, Ethan began simple lessons, using colorful objects to teach the hatchlings about shapes, numbers, and basic concepts. To everyone's amazement, the young dragons proved to be quick studies. Within days, they could identify different colored objects when asked. Within a week, they were sorting items by shape and size. Mira was astonished. Usually hatchlings don't begin cognitive training until they are at least 3 months old, she explained as they watched the dragons correctly sort gemstones into groups. Their brains are developing at an accelerated rate. Is that unusual? Ethan asked. It's unprecedented, came a voice from the doorway. Queen Nyleria entered, her guards remaining outside as she approached the play area where the hatchlings worked. The young dragons immediately abandoned their task and scampered toward her, chirping excitedly. Though they didn't climb on her as they did with Ethan, they circled her feet respectfully, accepting her gentle touches on their heads. They recognize you as their queen, Ethan observed. They recognize me as kin, however distant, she corrected. Dragon younglings instinctively defer to those with draconic blood, which makes their affection for you all the more remarkable. She straightened, her regal posture returning. I've come to inform you that we've received word from Azurath. He will return within the week to check on his offspring. Ethan's stomach tightened with anxiety. So soon? I thought we had more time. Dragon migrations are not always predictable. Something has called him back earlier than expected. The queen's expression grew serious. You should prepare yourself, Ethan Cole. Azurath is not just any dragon. He is one of the great WYRMS, ancient and powerful beyond your understanding. His judgment of you will determine not just your future, but potentially the future of human-dragon relations in Vastoria. With that sobering thought, she departed, leaving Ethan to ponder the impending meeting with the father of his charges. The days leading up to Azurath's return were tense throughout the castle. Additional guards were posted, ceremonial spaces were prepared, and the entire staff worked overtime to ensure everything was immaculate. The return of a great WYRM was always an occasion of tremendous importance and potential danger. In the nursery, Ethan focused on ensuring the hatchlings were healthy, happy, and showing their best development. He worked with them on their sorting games, their physical exercises, and even began teaching them to recognize simple written symbols, the beginnings of reading in both human and draconic scripts. On the morning Azurath was expected, Ethan woke before dawn, his nerves making sleep impossible. He dressed in the formal attire that had been provided for him, a tunic and trousers of deep blue embroidered with silver threads and patterns that mimicked scales. It was finer clothing than he had ever owned, yet he felt like an imposter wearing it. When he entered the nursery, the hatchlings were already awake, more active and vocal than usual. They raced around the chamber, climbing higher than normal, their wings extending in what looked like practice flaps. They sensed their sire's approach, Mira explained as she helped prepare a special breakfast for the younglings. Dragons can feel the presence of their kin over vast distances, especially direct blood relations. Are they excited or nervous? Ethan asked, watching their frenetic activity. Mira tilted her head, observing them. Both, I think. They're eager to see their father, but they also know instinctively that they will be judged. Dragons place great importance on the development of their young. By mid-morning, a horn sounded from the highest tower of Castle Drakeheart, the signal that Azurath had been spotted on the horizon. Ethan's heart pounded as he helped groom the hatchlings one final time, ensuring their scales gleamed and their tiny claws were clean. It's time, Dragon Master Thorn announced from the doorway, his own ceremonial robes even more elaborate than usual. Bring the hatchlings to the great courtyard. And remember your place, human. Speak only when spoken to, maintain a respectful distance, and above all, do not make direct eye contact with Azurath unless he specifically grants permission. Gathering the increasingly excited hatchlings, Ethan followed Thorn and Mira through the castle corridors. Servants and courtiers pressed themselves against the walls as they passed, bowing deeply to the royal dragons. Ethan felt their curious stares, heard their whispered comments about the human dragon keeper, but kept his focus on his charges. The great courtyard was an enormous open space at the heart of Castle Drakeheart, large enough to accommodate a full-grown dragon. Queen Nyleria already waited on a raised platform, surrounded by her most important advisors and guards. The rest of the courtyard's perimeter was lined with castle staff and nobility, all dressed in their finest attire. As Ethan guided the hatchlings to a specially prepared area near the queen's platform, a shadow passed overhead. Looking up, he saw an enormous crimson shape circling the castle, its wingspan blocking out the sun momentarily. The crowd gasped collectively as the massive dragon made a second pass, lower this time. On the third circle, Azurath descended. Even prepared by descriptions and warnings, Ethan was awestruck. The great crimson WYRM was colossal, easily the size of a small house. His scales shimmered like living rubies, and the horns that crowned his head gleamed like polished gold. When he landed in the center of the courtyard, the ground itself seemed to tremble. Most intimidating were his eyes, ancient, golden, with vertical pupils that contracted as they swept the assembled crowd. Intelligence and power radiated from those eyes, along with something else Ethan couldn't quite name. Wisdom, perhaps, or simply the weight of centuries of existence. The 6 hatchlings chirped excitedly, but to Ethan's surprise, they didn't immediately rush toward their father. Instead, they remained clustered around Ethan's legs, occasionally peeking out at the great dragon. Queen Nyleria stepped forward, performing an elegant bow, not the deep obeisance of a subject, but the respectful acknowledgement between allies of differing status. Great Azurath, Vastoria welcomes your return. Your offspring thrive under our care, as promised by our ancient covenant. Azurath's head lowered slightly in acknowledgement. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just in Ethan's ears, but somehow inside his mind as well, deep and melodious despite its tremendous power. Queen Nyleria of the House Drakeheart, descendant of my kin, I am pleased to return and find your kingdom prosperous. The great dragon's gaze shifted to the cluster of hatchlings partially hidden behind Ethan. I see my children. They have grown. They have indeed, the queen agreed. And they have formed an unexpected bond. Azurath's golden eyes finally fixed on Ethan, who fought the instinct to look away. The dragon's gaze was like standing too close to a fire, intense, primal, dangerous. Step forward, human, Azurath commanded. You who stand so closely to my offspring. Ethan swallowed hard and moved forward, the hatchlings following him like ducklings trailing their mother. He stopped at what he hoped was a respectful distance and bowed deeply. Great Azurath, I am Ethan Cole, Assistant Dragon Keeper. It is an honor to meet you. The dragon's nostrils flared as he took in Ethan's scent. You smell of distant lands, and of war, and of grief. His head tilted slightly. Yet my children cluster around you without fear. Explain this phenomenon, human Ethan Cole. Aware of the entire court watching, Ethan chose his words carefully. I cannot explain it fully, Great One. I have shown them kindness and respect. I have tried to understand their needs and meet them. Perhaps they sense that I seek nothing from them except their well-being. Azurath's tail swished thoughtfully, creating a gust of wind that ruffled the courtier's clothing. A simple answer, yet perhaps the correct one. He lowered his massive head further, bringing his eye level with Ethan's. My children do not give their trust easily. That they have given it to you suggests either remarkable insight on your part or remarkable foolishness. Before Ethan could respond, the smallest hatchling, Ruby, darted forward and nuzzled Azurath's foreclaw, chirping rapidly as if telling him something important. The great dragon listened, his expression unreadable to human eyes. After a moment, Azurath raised his head again and addressed the queen. I wish to speak with this human alone. The hatchlings may remain, but all others will withdraw. A murmur of surprise ran through the assembled court. Such a private audience was unprecedented. The queen hesitated only briefly before nodding. As you wish, great Azurath. The courtyard is yours. She gestured, and the courtiers, guards, and staff began to file out, including Dragon Master Thorn, whose expression was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Soon, only Ethan, Azurath, and the 6 hatchlings remained in the massive space. The young dragon seemed to sense the importance of the moment, settling into attentive poses near Ethan's feet. Now, Ethan Cole, Azurath rumbled, we shall speak truly, without the performance required by court protocol. To Ethan's astonishment, the enormous dragon before him began to shrink and transform. Within moments, where the massive WYRM had stood, there now was the figure of a tall man with deep crimson hair streaked with gold, wearing elegant robes of matching colors. Only his golden, vertical-pupiled eyes remained the same. This form allows for easier conversation, Azurath explained, his voice now at a human volume, though still carrying the same resonant quality. and it tends to put humans more at ease. Thank you. Ethan managed, still startled by the transformation. The dragon in human form approached, and the hatchlings scampered to him, climbing his robes as they did with Ethan. Azurath smiled, a surprisingly warm expression on his regal features. My children have told me much about you, in their way, he said, gently stroking the head of the hatchling that had perched on his shoulder. They are not yet capable of complex communication, but emotions and impressions flow easily between dragon kin. They feel safe with you. Happy. Stimulated. He fixed Ethan with those penetrating golden eyes. Do you know how rare that is? Dragon Master Thorn has suggested it's unprecedented, Ethan admitted. Thorn understands much about dragons, but he has always seen us through the lens of awe and deference. My kind appreciates respect, but we can sense when it comes from fear or ambition rather than genuine regard. Azurath set down the hatchlings, who immediately began a game of chase around the two adults. When my clutch was ready to hatch, I brought them to Vastoria because of the ancient covenant between my kind and the Drakeheart line. It is tradition. It is politics. He sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. But I had concerns. The handlers here are well-trained but rigid in their thinking. Dragons, especially the young, need more than correct temperature and proper nutrition. They need connection. That's what I believed, Ethan said, gaining confidence. They're intelligent, social beings. They need interaction, stimulation, affection, just like human children. Azurath nodded approvingly. Precisely. And somehow, despite all the elaborate preparations of the royal court, it was a simple human janitor who understood this fundamental truth. His expression grew curious. Tell me, Ethan Cole, what led you to this understanding? You have no training in draconic lore, no bloodline connection to our kind. Ethan thought about the question. I was a teacher before the wars took my home and family. I worked with young children for years, and I've found that all young creatures, regardless of species, share certain needs: security, consistency, gentle guidance, and love. Love. Azurath tested the word as if it were an unfamiliar concept, though Ethan suspected it was not. An emotion humans speak of frequently, but demonstrate inconsistently. That's true of all peoples, I think, Ethan said carefully. We all fall short of our ideals sometimes. The Dragon Man smiled again, more broadly this time. Diplomatic as well as insightful. You continue to surprise me, Ethan Cole. He glanced at the playing hatchlings. My children will remain in Vastoria for another year before they are ready to return to the dragon territories. During that time, they will need guidance from someone who understands both their draconic nature and their developmental needs. Ethan's heart quickened. I would be honored to continue caring for them, if you permit it. I do more than permit it. I require it. Azurath's tone became formal. Ethan Cole, I name you Dragon Friend, a title rarely bestowed upon humans. You will serve as primary caretaker to my offspring until they reach juvenile stage. You will receive instruction from Dragon Master Thorn in matters of draconic physiology and tradition, but in matters of daily care and early education, your judgment shall prevail. It was an enormous responsibility, far beyond anything Ethan had anticipated. I thank you for your trust, great Azurath. I will do my utmost to deserve it. I know you will. The Dragon Man's expression softened slightly. My children have shown better judgment than many of my kind would admit. They recognized something in you, a quality that transcends species and speaks to the best potential of both our races. He began to walk in a slow circle around Ethan, the hatchlings following in a playful parade. There was a time when dragons and humans lived in closer harmony, when understanding flowed more freely between our kinds. Perhaps, in this small way, we begin to recover something precious that was lost. The significance of the moment was not lost on Ethan. This wasn't just about 6 hatchlings and 1 human caretaker. It was about possibilities, for cooperation, for mutual respect, for a different kind of relationship between species often separated by fear and misunderstanding. One of the hatchlings, Ruby again, always the boldest, chirped insistently, tugging at both Ethan's pant leg and Azurath's robe, as if trying to pull them closer together. Both man and dragon laughed at the same moment, a shared reaction that seemed to please the tiny dragon immensely. I believe, Azurath said with amusement in his golden eyes, that my daughter is suggesting we formalize our arrangement with the traditional greeting between dragon allies. Ethan looked uncertain. I'm afraid I don't know the protocol. Simply extend your hand, palm upward. Ethan did as instructed. Azurath placed his own hand, palm downward, above Ethan's, leaving a small space between them. Then, to Ethan's amazement, a small flame appeared in that space, dancing between their hands without burning either of them. It glowed with shifting colors, crimson like Azurath's scales, then blue like Ethan's ceremonial clothing, then a bright gold that reminded Ethan of sunrise over the eastern mountains. The flame of accord, Azurath explained. It reflects the harmony between our energies and intentions. He looked genuinely pleased. A strong, vibrant flame indicates a promising alliance. As the flame faded, Ethan felt a strange warmth spreading through his body, not uncomfortable, but definitely noticeable. What was that? A small gift, Azurath replied enigmatically. You'll understand in time. The great dragon straightened, his manner becoming more formal again. I must return to my larger form for the court proceedings. Queen Nyleria will expect a full report on my offspring's development and a renewal of the covenant between Dragon and Drakeheart. He fixed Ethan with one last penetrating look. We will speak again, dragon friend Ethan Cole. Care well for my children in the meantime. With that, his form began to shimmer and expand, returning to the massive crimson HFY that had first arrived. The hatchlings chirped excitedly, scampering back to Ethan as their father resumed his imposing draconic presence. Azurath raised his head and released a resonant roar that surely echoed throughout the entire castle, the signal for the court to return. As the courtyard began to fill once more with nobles, guards, and castle staff, Ethan stood straighter, a new confidence flowing through him. The hatchlings clustered around his legs, occasionally chirping up at him as if offering encouragement. Queen Nyleria was the first to re-enter, her expression curious as she took in the scene. Dragon Master Thorn followed, his face tight, with barely concealed anxiety. Queen Nyleria of House Drakeheart. Azurath's voice boomed across the courtyard. I have evaluated my offspring and their care. I find them thriving beyond expectation. Relief visibly washed over the queen's face. We are pleased to hear this, great Azurath. Furthermore, the dragon continued, I have designated the human Ethan Cole as dragon friend and primary caretaker to my clutch for the remainder of their time in Vastoria. A shocked murmur ran through the assembled court. Dragon friend was a title of legend, spoken of in ancient texts but not bestowed within living memory. Dragon Master Thorn looked as though he might collapse from the shock. As you wish, great Azurath, the queen responded smoothly, though her eyes widened slightly. Vastoria honors your choice and will support dragon friend Ethan Cole in his duties. Azurath's massive head dipped in acknowledgement. I shall return in 3 months to check on their progress again. Until then, I entrust my most precious treasures to your kingdom, and specifically to the care of your most unexpected servant. With those words, the great dragon launched himself skyward, his massive wings creating a windstorm that sent courtiers clutching at their hats and robes. He circled the castle once more before turning eastward, his crimson form gradually diminishing until he was merely a speck on the horizon. In the sudden silence following his departure, every eye in the courtyard turned to Ethan. The 6 hatchlings, sensing his momentary discomfort with the attention, pressed closer to his legs supportively. Queen Nyleria approached, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to all assembled. It seems, Ethan Cole, that you have accomplished what no human in recorded history has managed. You have earned not just the trust of dragon younglings, but the explicit endorsement of a great WYRM. She paused, studying him. The title of dragon friend carries significant weight in our kingdom. With it comes responsibilities and privileges beyond your current position. She turned to address the court. Let it be known throughout Vastoria that Ethan Cole stands under the direct protection of both the Crown and Azurath the Crimson. He speaks with authority on matters relating to the royal hatchlings, and his new status grants him a seat on the Council of 9 when matters concerning dragons are discussed. Dragon Master Thorn stepped forward, visibly struggling to master his emotions. Your Majesty, with all due respect, this is unprecedented. The human has no training, no bloodline connection to dragonkind. To elevate him to such a position based solely on Azuratha's word is precisely what the Covenant requires, the Queen interrupted sharply. Or would you suggest we ignore the explicit wishes of a great WYRM, Dragon Master? Thorn paled. No, Your Majesty. Of course not. Then I suggest you focus your considerable expertise on ensuring Dragon Friend Cole receives all the technical knowledge he requires to excel in his expanded role. The Queen's tone softened slightly. Your experience remains invaluable, Dragon Master Thorn. But we must all adapt to this new circumstance. She turned back to Ethan, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of awe and apprehension. As for you, Dragon Friend Cole, I expect you to continue the excellent care you have provided thus far. Additionally, you will begin attending appropriate court functions and council meetings. Mira will help prepare you for these new duties. Thank you, Your Majesty, Ethan said, bowing deeply. I'll do my best to honor both your trust and Azuratha's. See that you do. With a final nod, the Queen departed, her entourage trailing behind her. As the courtyard gradually emptied, Mira approached Ethan, her eyes wide with amazement. Dragon Friend, she breathed. Do you have any idea how significant that title is? There hasn't been a human dragon friend in Vastoria for at least 3 centuries. Ethan shook his head, still trying to process everything that had happened. I'm just a teacher who became a janitor who somehow ended up with 6 dragon hatchlings thinking I'm their favorite pillow. Mira laughed, a bright, musical sound. Well, that somehow has just made you one of the most important humans in the kingdom. She nodded toward the hatchlings, who were now playing a complex game of tag around Ethan's legs. And based on how happy they look, I'd say you've earned it. Looking down at the joyful young dragons, Ethan felt a surge of affection. In a strange way, these creatures had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever after the war took his family, a sense of purpose, of being needed, of having others depend on him and trust him completely. Come on, little ones, he said warmly. Let's go back to the nursery. I think we all deserve a rest after such an exciting morning. As he led the hatchlings back through the castle corridors, their happy chirps echoing off the ancient stones, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. From refugee to janitor to dragon friend in less than a year. From loss and emptiness to purpose and connection. All because 6 tiny dragons kept escaping the royal nursery and choosing the lap of a lonely human janitor as their favorite place to sleep. In the months that followed, Ethan grew into his role as dragon friend and primary caretaker to Azuratha's offspring. The hatchlings developed rapidly under his care, beginning to speak their first words in both draconic and human languages by the time they reached 6 months of age. Ruby, the smallest and boldest of the clutch, was the first to master human speech. Ethan, she had said one morning, her voice high and musical, causing him to drop the feeding bowl in shock. By the end of the week, all 6 could say his name, along with simple requests and observations. Their physical development was equally impressive. Their wingspan doubled, then tripled. They grew from cat-sized to dog-sized, their appetites increasing proportionally. And most dramatically, they began to manifest their innate fire magic, starting with warm breath and culminating in their first controlled flame breathing during their 8th month. Throughout it all, their bond with Ethan only deepened. They still sought his company constantly, though they no longer fit in his lap. Instead, they would curl around his feet during story time or perch on his shoulders, one at a time now, given their increased size, during walks through the castle grounds. Ethan's status in the castle hierarchy had risen correspondingly. Courtiers who once ignored him now bowed respectfully when he passed. He attended council meetings when dragon matters were discussed, his insights often proving valuable. Even Dragon Master Thorn had grudgingly come to respect Ethan's intuitive understanding of draconic younglings, though he remained formal and somewhat distant. Queen Nyleria observed all of this with quiet satisfaction. The unprecedented bond between Ethan and the royal hatchlings had opened new possibilities for human-dragon relations throughout the kingdom. Other dragon clans, hearing of Azuratha's endorsement, began sending representatives to observe the arrangement. Some even brought their own younglings for short educational exchanges. On the eve of the hatchlings' first birthday, a significant milestone in draconic development, Ethan sat with them in a special chamber adjoining the nursery that had been converted into a classroom. Now the size of small ponies, the young dragons arranged themselves in a semicircle as Ethan read to them from an ancient text on dragon history. And so, he concluded, the Treaty of Ember Peak established the modern boundaries between dragon territories and the human kingdoms, leading to 3 centuries of relative peace. Ruby, as always, was the first to respond. But why fighting before? Dragons and humans friends now. Her grammar was still developing, but her comprehension was remarkable for her age. All the hatchlings were far more advanced intellectually than human children of equivalent development, though their emotional maturity progressed at a more similar rate. That's a very good question, Ethan acknowledged. Sometimes different peoples have trouble understanding each other. They become afraid of differences instead of appreciating them. Another hatchling, one Ethan had named Ember for the unusual golden-orange flecks in his scales, tilted his head thoughtfully, like Dragon Master Thorn not understanding us at first. Ethan suppressed a smile. The young dragons were perceptive, sometimes uncomfortably so. Dragon Master Thorn has devoted his life to understanding dragons. But yes, sometimes even experts can have trouble seeing things in new ways. But you understood, Ruby said with absolute certainty. You're not expert, but you understood us. Sometimes, Ethan said gently, the most important understanding comes not from study, but from simply listening and caring. The lesson concluded, and the hatchlings were released for their afternoon play period in the secure outdoor area that had been constructed for them as they outgrew the nursery. Ethan watched them from a viewing platform, smiling as they practiced gliding from small heights and playfully wrestled with each other. They are thriving beyond all expectations, came Queen Nyleria's voice from behind him. Ethan turned and bowed. Your Majesty, I didn't hear you approach. Few do, she said with a slight smile, moving to stand beside him at the railing. My draconic heritage includes certain subtle qualities. They watched the young dragons in companionable silence for a moment. Azurath returns tomorrow for the first-year ceremony, the queen finally said. He is bringing representatives from 3 other major dragon clans. Word of your success with his offspring has spread throughout dragonkind. Ethan nodded, having been briefed on the upcoming event. The hatchlings are excited to see their father again. They talk about him often. And what do they say of him? They remember more than I would have thought possible. They speak of his voice, his strength. They say he told them to watch for a kind heart when they arrived here. Ethan glanced at the queen. I think perhaps their placement in Vastoria and their subsequent escapes may not have been as random as we initially believed. The queen's lips curved in a knowing smile. Dragons play long games, Ethan Cole. Their strategies unfold over decades, sometimes centuries. Azurath is older and wiser than most of his kind. If he arranged for his offspring to find you, he had his reasons. Below them, Ruby executed a perfect glide from a rock formation to a soft landing pad, prompting cheers from her siblings. She will lead the clutch one day, the queen observed. Her spirit is strongest. Yes, Ethan agreed, though they all have their strengths. Ember is the most thoughtful, Spark the most agile, Flame the most patient, Inferno the most precise, and Blaze the most empathetic. Together, they'll be a formidable force. And they will always remember the human who cared for them when they were small. The queen turned to face him directly. You have changed things, Ethan Cole, not just for these 6 dragons, but potentially for the relationship between our species. The ripples of what began here with a janitor's kindness may spread far beyond what either of us can foresee. Ethan felt the weight of her words, understanding that he had become part of something much larger than himself. I hope those ripples bring positive change, Your Majesty. As do I. She glanced once more at the playing dragons before turning to leave. Rest well tonight, dragon friend. Tomorrow begins a new chapter in a very old story. The first-year ceremony for Azurath's offspring was held in the largest ceremonial space in Castle Drakeheart, the ancient amphitheater carved into the mountainside behind the castle. Originally built centuries ago for meetings between dragons and humans during the formation of their earliest alliances, it had rarely been used in recent generations as such direct interactions became less common. Today, however, it was filled to capacity. The curved stone seating held hundreds of Astorian nobility and officials. The royal family occupied a special section at the center. Most impressive, however, was the delegation of full-grown dragons perched on specially reinforced platforms around the upper rim of the amphitheater. Azurath, magnificent in his full draconic form, occupied the central position. Flanking him were representatives of three other major dragon clans: Nerith the Sapphire, Kulus the Emerald, and Ancient Vormix the Silver, whose scales had dulled somewhat with his tremendous age, but who remained imposing nonetheless. Ethan waited with the 6 young dragons in a preparation chamber beneath the amphitheater. They were nervous but excited, preening and checking each other's scales to ensure they looked their best. Though they had grown remarkably over the past year, they were still tiny compared to the adult dragons waiting above, closer in size to large horses than to their massive sire. "Remember what we practiced," Ethan reminded them gently. "Enter in formation, bow to the assembled dragons, then to Queen Nyleria, then demonstrate your skills in the order we discussed." "We remember," Ethan, Ruby assured him, her speech now fluent though still carrying the distinctive musical cadence of young dragons. "We will make you proud." The simple statement touched him deeply. "You already make me proud every day," he told them. "No matter what happens up there, that won't change." A ceremonial horn sounded above, their cue to enter. The young dragons arranged themselves in a perfect V formation, with Ruby at the point. Ethan took his position behind them, and together they ascended the wide stone ramp that led to the amphitheater floor. Sunlight washed over them as they emerged, and a collective murmur ran through the assembled crowd. The young dragons held their formation perfectly, their scales gleaming in the midday light as they proceeded to the center of the circular space. Following the ceremonial protocol they had rehearsed, the 6 dragons bowed first to the adult dragons ringed above, then to Queen Nyleria and the royal party. Ethan remained behind them, his role today that of presenter rather than participant. Azurath's voice resonated throughout the amphitheater, enhanced by acoustics designed specifically for draconic speech. "On this day, we mark the first year of life for the 6th clutch of the Crimson Line. Let them demonstrate the growth and learning they have achieved under the care of Astoria and the guidance of dragon friend Ethan Cole." With that introduction, the young dragons began their carefully prepared demonstration. They started with physical skills, synchronized flight patterns, precision landings, controlled fire breathing in varying intensities and patterns. The crowd gasped and applauded as the 6 dragons created an interwoven tapestry of flame against the clear blue sky, each stream of fire distinct in its color and pattern. Next came demonstrations of their intellectual development. They solved complex puzzles placed in the center of the amphitheater, showed their facility with both human and draconic languages, and even performed a brief historical dramatic presentation about the Treaty of Ember Peak, the very lesson Ethan had taught them the day before. Throughout it all, Ethan watched with a mixture of pride, love, and the beginning edges of melancholy. These remarkable beings had been entrusted to his care as tiny hatchlings who fit in his lap. Now they were demonstrating their growing independence and abilities before the most powerful members of their kind. One day, not too far in the future, they would no longer need him. As the demonstration concluded, the 6 young dragons returned to formation in front of Ethan, facing the assembled dignitaries with heads held high. Azurath spoke again, his tone formal, but with an undercurrent of unmistakable pride. "The Crimson Line acknowledges the exceptional development of this clutch. Vastoria has fulfilled its covenant obligations with distinction." The great dragon's gaze shifted to Ethan. "Step forward, dragon friend." Ethan moved to stand beside Ruby, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes, human and draconic, fixed upon him. The unprecedented bond between these younglings and their human caretaker has produced results that exceed all expectations, Azurath continued. In recognition of this achievement, the Dragon Conclave has made a decision. The amphitheater fell completely silent, even the usual rustling and murmuring of the crowd stilled by the weight of the moment. Ethan Cole, once a teacher of human children, then a castle janitor, now dragon friend, we offer you a formal position heretofore unestablished, liaison of young minds. You will oversee educational exchange between dragon younglings and gifted human children, building understanding between our kinds from the earliest ages. Ethan's mind reeled at the implications. This wasn't just about continuing to care for Azurath's offspring. It was about creating an entirely new approach to human-dragon relations, starting with the young of both species. This position, Azurath continued, will require you to divide your time between Vastoria and the dragon territories to the east. You will help establish a new academy where young dragons and humans can learn together and from each other. Queen Nyleria has already indicated Vastoria's support for this initiative. Ethan glanced at the queen, who inclined her head slightly in confirmation. The choice is yours, Azurath concluded. You may continue your current role until my offspring reach juvenile stage, or you may accept this broader responsibility. Before Ethan could respond, Ruby turned to face him. Though they had not rehearsed this, none of the other dragons seemed surprised. Clearly, they had planned something among themselves. Ethan, Ruby said, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater, you found us when we were lost. You gave us comfort when we needed rest. You taught us when we were ready to learn. Her golden eyes held his steadily. Now we ask you to do the same for others like us, and for human younglings who might never otherwise know the friendship possible between our kinds. The other 5 dragons moved to stand in a circle around Ethan, a living wall of crimson scales and golden eyes. In perfect unison, they each extended a wing to touch his shoulders and back, creating a canopy of translucent red membrane above him. We choose you, they said together, as dragons have always chosen their truest allies, not through treaty or politics, but through the wisdom of the heart. Emotion tightened Ethan's throat. These remarkable beings, whom he had first encountered as tiny escapees seeking comfort in a lonely janitor's lap, now stood proud and strong, offering him a purpose greater than any he could have imagined when he crossed the mountains into Vastoria. He looked up at Azurath, then at Queen Nyleria, and finally at each of the 6 young dragons surrounding him. The path before him was clear. I accept, he said simply. As if his acceptance were a signal, the 6 young dragons released their first true coordinated roar, not the childish chirps of hatchlings, but the resonant call of dragons coming into their power. The sound echoed through the amphitheater and beyond, rolling across the castle grounds and into the city below. Above them, Azurath and the other adult dragons answered with roars of their own, creating a layered harmony of draconic voices that vibrated through the very stones of the ancient structure. Standing at the center of this powerful moment, surrounded by the dragons who had changed his life, Ethan Cole, once a soldier, then a teacher, then a janitor, now dragon friend and liaison of young minds, felt something long broken within him finally heal completely. He had lost one family to war and hatred. He had now gained another through kindness and understanding. And together, perhaps they could build a world where such losses became increasingly rare. A world where dragons and humans saw each other not as ancient enemies or uneasy allies, but as friends capable of genuine care and connection. It had begun with the simplest of acts, a human showing kindness to young creatures in need of comfort. It would continue with the same fundamental principle, extended to a broader vision. For in the end, whether dragon or human, the young needed the same things: safety, guidance, and love. In that shared need lay the hope for a better future for both their kinds. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, the 6 young dragons remained close to Ethan, their excitement about the future bubbling over in rapid speech and occasional puffs of flame. We'll help you design the academy, Ruby promised earnestly. And we'll be the first students, added Ember. And teach the humans not to be afraid, Blaze chimed in. Ethan smiled at their enthusiasm. We have much work to do, but yes, you'll all be part of it. He reached out to touch each of their heads affectionately. For now, though, I think your father wishes to spend time with you. Go to him. I'll see you all tomorrow. The young dragons nuzzled him one last time before bounding off to join Azurath, who awaited them at the edge of the amphitheater. As Ethan watched them go, Queen Nyleria approached, her expression thoughtful. "When I offered a position to a half-dead human refugee found at our borders, I never imagined it would lead to this," she admitted. "The dragons guided you to us for a reason, it seems." "I'm still not entirely sure what that reason is," Ethan confessed. "But I'm grateful for where it has led." The queen's gaze followed the young dragons as they joyfully greeted their father. Sometimes the wisest path forward is one we could never have planned, one that appears unexpectedly, like 6 young dragons escaping their nursery to find comfort in the lap of a kind-hearted janitor. Ethan couldn't have agreed more. The journey ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, but also incredible possibilities, all because he had offered simple kindness to creatures in need, and they had recognized the worth of his human heart. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.